how do you actually follow Anne Widdecombe? That's my first question. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. It really is such a great pleasure to be here in my role as Deputy Leader of what is really a great party. And let me tell you, I am absolutely delighted that you are all here. And let me tell you also, the sheer numbers in this room demonstrate to me the strength of feeling around the country about the woeful state of British politics and how the governing classes have allowed this once great country to slip into decline. This is managed decline, it's not good enough, and it stops now. Now, what I'd like you to do is to do something for me, if you would. Please mark today's date, that's Saturday, the 15th of April, in your diaries, because this is the day that politics changes. This is the day when we plan and we plot to fracture the landscape of British politics. Now, we have just over 1 year to go until what could be a seismic general election. Now, I'm not an angry person by nature, but I am absolutely incensed at the incompetence shown by the two main parties. Neither of them has any vision at all. Now, we're in a very bizarre position, if you ask me, where the ruling Conservative Party seems to have forgotten what it is to be Conservative. Now, the government is either totally incompetent or it is deliberately wrecking the country. And it seems to believe that the answer to Britain's problems, and there are many of them, is to increase tax, to make more people pay, to make small businesses suffer, to force hardship on people. And quite frankly, they don't care. This is a Conservative Party in name only. It is actually not a Conservative Party at all. It is a socialist party, or as Richard calls them, and rightly so, I think, a con-socialist party. This is a party of high tax, high regulation, low growth and strangulation. And their ineptitude means that the UK is set to be one of the worst performing major economies in the world this year, and that is according to revised forecasts by the IMF. So let's look at the other option. The Labour Party also doesn't know what to do. It has no vision, it has no backbone. Now, actually, if you ask people on the street, which I do in my job working for Talk TV, what does the Labour Party actually stand for? They can't tell you. There again, if you ask the same people on the street what the Conservatives stand for, they can't tell you either. And the two main parties are, quite frankly, out of touch and they are out of time. And the public knows this. Now, we are the only party that is consistently growing in the polls. This is the only party that has a vision, that has drive, that believes in entrepreneurship, in the extraordinary skills of the British people. And we believe in the resilience of the British people. We really are a breath of fresh air on the political landscape, and we are exploding in popularity whilst the two main parties are imploding. Make no mistake, change is in the air. I can feel it. I haven't felt this for a very long time. I can really feel it. And we've done it before, and we will do it again. So how have we ended up here with 800 of you in a room? Well, the Brexit Party, of course, was the forerunner of this party. It was the most unbelievably successful election fighting machine. I looked back, out of a total of 87 MEPs from the United Kingdom in the European Parliament, we managed to get 28 elected. That was nearly a third of the total number of UK MEPs. It was an extraordinary feat. Now, as Anne was saying, we were elected with a very simple task, and that is to get the UK out of the European Union. And despite the odds, and everyone said you'll never do it, we did do it. But we made one fatal mistake. And that mistake was to trust the Tories to deliver what they promised. Now, despite the continual reassurances, the Conservative Party has ripped this country apart, putting party before country. They have annexed Northern Ireland. They've put a border in the Irish Sea. They've left Northern Ireland's 2 million citizens at the mercy of the European Union, and that is simply not acceptable. And just to reiterate what Brexit Ben said, Rishi Sunak, desperate to curry favour with Joe Biden, forced through this Windsor framework. Let me just reiterate to you, this is not a new deal. It is lipstick on a pig. It leaves Northern Ireland at the whim of the EU and, as Ben rightly said, fractures the 1800 Act of Union. And quite frankly, what this does, the Windsor framework, is it rips the UK apart at its seams. And how dare the US president come here and tell us how to govern our own country? It goes without saying, Joe Biden can't even ride a bike without falling off. So what he knows about running Britain isn't worth knowing. Now, let me be clear as well, and to reiterate some of the other points. Biden is not remotely interested in the UK. He spent, if you just look at the last trip, he spent 12 hours in Northern Ireland, and he will spend 4 days in the Republic. That is hardly unbiased. He is not a friend of the United Kingdom. So, in short, the Tories have made an awful mess of this, and it's time for us to sort it out. Now, the journey that we've come on is quite an extraordinary one, because when we left the EU, we put the Brexit Party into cold storage, believing foolishly that the government would be true to its word and that we would leave the EU as one united kingdom. I suppose we were slightly smart in that at the back of our minds, we always knew it was a risk to trust the Tories. So we had a backup plan. We put the Brexit Party onto ice. And then when we realised that we had indeed been duped, we decided to de-ice the party. And 3 of us had stayed with the party throughout that time. Of course, Richard, our great leader, Paul, the chief executive, and me. We took the decision to rename the party, and the Brexit Party became Reform UK. I'm often asked, why is that the case? Well, the reason behind it was that Brexit had been accomplished, although incomplete, and we felt that Brexit was just the first of many reforms that this country needs to get back on its feet. So we de-iced the party, we dusted it down, and we took it out of cold storage. Now, initially, we faced a massive uphill battle to be heard, to be taken seriously, and also to get media appearances. And we started fielding candidates in various elections, and we started making ground. And what a difference the last few months has made. We are now polling consistently at around 10%. We're featuring... We are also featuring on various media outlets. Richard and I both have our own shows on Talk TV, even though mine's much better. And even the mainstream media is having to take notice. Now, a number of other things have also happened. I'm delighted to say, and I will say it again, the band of MEPs is now back together. And there's such a special feeling upstairs being with the likes of Belinda and Alex and Anne and Ben and so on. We've been in constant touch throughout this entire journey. I'm so thrilled, my heart is bursting that we have 11 former MEPs coming back into the Reform UK family. They're coming back to fight for the cause. Because like us, they were duped. They wanted to believe the Conservative rhetoric. But like us, they also know this was lip service alone. So the bottom line is, we know what we stand for. Now, whether we like it or not, this country, in my mind, is well and truly broken. Nothing works in this country. So, when I'm asked on the street, what does Reform UK actually stand for? And I'll tell you, when you ask people on the street what we stand for, they know. They know we stand for low tax, low regulation, and high growth. By having lower taxes, we attract the best and the brightest people to the United Kingdom. We stand for slashing income tax for the lowest paid. Anyone who earns under £20,000 should be taken out of tax completely. Just think of the difference that will make to people's lives. What about waiting lists in hospitals? Richard touched on this earlier. We believe in zero waiting lists. It is simply not acceptable to let elderly people live in pain for 2 years before they can have a hip replacement. We believe in stopping the boats, and we are spending around £7 million every single day housing illegal migrants, whilst we allow our own people to suffer from the cost of living crisis. That is unacceptable, and it needs to stop now. And we've also mentioned this before, we want an end to the net zero nonsense, because actually we demand a referendum on net zero. Is this really what people wanted? Is it really what people wanted? Did people really want to be poorer? Did they want to be told to turn their lights off? Did they want to see their businesses struggle and go under? No, they didn't. We demand a referendum on net zero. And we need to have cheap energy. Richard talks about the treasure under our feet, and that's a really good analogy. If you have cheap energy, people and businesses thrive and prosper. What sort of country are we living in when we're being told by the authorities to turn off our lights? It is unacceptable. Again, provide cheap British energy and allow people to live comfortable lives. Now, often I wonder if we are some sort of policy generation department for the Conservative Party, because they keep nicking all our policies. But as they say, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. But I do want to talk about health. It is something of a specialist subject for me. I trained a long time ago, worked in the NHS, worked in A&E, worked as a house officer and then a senior house officer and worked in A&E. And I want to give you some facts and figures on health, just to put the record straight, okay? Contrary to what you are repeatedly being told by vested interests, the NHS is not starved of cash. It has never had so much money poured into it. We are the third highest spending nation, and we spend over 10% of our GDP on health. And here's another lie. We keep being told also, the NHS, it's the envy of the world. It is not the envy of the world. It is a downright lie. And despite the record levels of funding, let me tell you, clinical outcomes in this country are worse than major competitive countries. We're not in the top 10. We have fewer MRI scanners than Estonia and Slovakia. Let's look at cancer. It affects 1 in 3 of us. We know people with cancer, our friends, our families with cancer. Let's look at our cancer rates. We would hope that actually our cancer survival rates in this country are really good. They're terrible. They're appalling, actually. We are second from bottom in the league tables. When we look at survival rates, and I was talking to Professor Carol Sikora about this, and we were hand-wringing, when you look at survival rates for cancer in Britain, for 9 out of 10 cancers, they're lower than anywhere else in Europe. And then let's look at the waiting lists. The waiting lists are insane. There are over 8 million people waiting for elective procedures. More than 300,000, that's 1/3 of a million people, have been waiting more than a year for their procedure. More than 23,000 have been waiting for 2 years, and some have been waiting even longer. Part of that problem, of course, is the pointless bureaucracy, which is grinding hospitals to a halt. Also, the nonsense about lockdowns, where there was no scientific evidence behind lockdowns at all, and it made the system even more fractured. You know, the really sad thing, we have an almost total collapse of accident and emergency services. Those aren't my words, those are the words of Dr. Adrian Boyle. He's the head of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. Get that through your heads. We have an almost total collapse of A&E. Thousands, and we know this from the news, thousands of patients are stuck in ambulances outside hospitals. 125,000 people had to wait more than 12 hours before being admitted to hospital. The average waiting time to see a doctor, if you've had a heart attack, you need to be seen really quickly. If you've had a heart attack, you want to see that doctor. Well, the average waiting time, if you've had a heart attack, is over 1 hour. If you wait more than 1 hour, you will be dead. That's how serious this situation is. People are dying because they are not getting prompt care. And when you look at preventable mortality, it's now running at 500 deaths every single week in this country. On top of this, we have other problems. More than 1,200 GP practices have closed in the last 8 years. That has meant elderly and vulnerable people have to now travel even further to get the care that they need. And more worryingly, the number of practices, GP practices, is now the lowest on record. But, and I do think there is a big but here, I think the public has finally wised up. They know the NHS is not the envy of the world. And in fact, when you look at the surveys, public satisfaction with the NHS is now at an all-time low. So we've got problems in A&E, we've got problems, as we said, admitting people, you've got a lack of GP practices as well. And just to make matters worse, the junior doctors are now trying to wreck what is left of the NHS by announcing unprecedented strikes. Now, it transpires to me that the leader, the BMA leader of the junior doctors, his name is Dr. Rob Lawrenson, is on holiday. And that is how much he cares about the health of patients. He couldn't even be bothered to turn up to his own strike. And that speaks volumes to me. This is about politics, it's not about patient care. And think about this, he didn't even lose any money because he was on holiday. He had paid leave. So he went away and allowed the system, the healthcare system, to collapse. That's how much he actually cares about the British people. And I've tried to understand what the BMA wants, but the demands from the BMA also don't seem to make much sense to me. They're demanding 35% pay increase. Now, they say at the heart of this is patient safety. But how does that make sense? Because if you pay doctors more, how does that improve patient safety? The biggest issue here is we simply don't train enough doctors in this country. So, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we used to cap the number at 7,500 that we could train every single year. The government has increased it in the last few years to 10,000 a year, and that is why we steal doctors from other countries, because we simply don't train enough. Now, Reform UK believes that we need to double that number. We need to train about 20,000 doctors every single year. But we also need to change the admission process, because some of those accepted to medical school are often trying to become doctors just to have the title. The whole system actually needs to be ripped up, and it needs to be started again. And who suffers at the end of this? It's the patients. And here's the irony. Guess what? Patients pay for this terrible service. And the strike this week has been absolutely devastating. 350,000 appointments and operations have to be rescheduled as a result of the strikes. And patients were not safe in hospitals because there was not enough night cover. Hospitals were actually desperately reaching out to the BMA and saying, please, can we have doctors back into A&E because there's no emergency cover at all, and emergency cover was completely compromised as a result. No services at all were exempt from that action. It's dangerous, it's downright despicable, and as a medic, I just wonder, whatever happened to the Hippocratic Oath? First, do no harm. Well, the BMA, in my mind, has put politics before patient safety. We now know the strikes in March tripled the number of excess deaths. They caused people to die. And I was so angry, I resigned my membership of the British Medical Association, because this is not what we do as doctors. But the truth of this is, for me, it's not really about money. The fact is we're desperately short of staff. As I said, we're short of 12,000 doctors. 12,000. We're short of 50,000 nurses. We're recruiting the wrong people into medicine. And when you look at the numbers, 1/3 of newly qualified doctors leave the service within 5 years of qualifying. So we need to make the system better and we need to make it fairer. And that is why Reform UK is the only party that believes the way to get the best doctors and to keep doctors in the service is to ensure that the exorbitant fees that they pay as students are written off by the government if they stay within the service for, say, 5 to 10 years after graduation. What this would do, it would immediately make a really big difference to recruitment and retention. It wouldn't bankrupt the country. And more importantly, actually, it would make a massive difference to the doctors themselves. They would feel happier, they would feel appreciated, and they would feel cared for. It's a really simple mantra: train and retain. The good news is political parties, the other political parties, are deeply worried about the threat of Reform UK. They're worried about the threat that we pose, and the Tories, I have to tell you, even had an away day to talk about the threat that Reform UK poses, and that I like. Now, we also know that other vested interests are also rattled, and I can tell you the bile and the vitriol that Richard and I get on social media is really off the scale now. It's really ramped up dramatically over the last few months. And what that means to me is it means we're cutting through. That means we are a threat. And when I looked up the definition of a threat, it's something likely to cause damage or danger. I rather like that, and they better believe it. So let me just tell you what we did. Last month, we posted 13 videos, okay? You've seen us filming today. We posted 13 videos. 1.2 million people viewed those videos. We appeared on 2.1 million Twitter feeds. We got another 10,000 new followers across all platforms. And the press conference, where we announced all the MEPs had come back together, that the band had reformed, was watched by 100,000 people. And the press coverage alone from that press conference generated 1 million appearances on Twitter feeds. Nigel's video was watched nearly 200,000 times, as was Richard's and Anne's. So social media, we are really making waves. People know who Reform UK are. So I guess the big question is, what happens from here? Well, timing, as they say, is everything. I don't know about you, but I really feel there's such change in the air. I haven't felt this for a very long time, actually, since we were actually the Brexit Party. I feel the same thing, the numbers in this room. Things are definitely changing. People are coming towards the party. And more importantly, people are, for the first time, considering changing their voting habits of a lifetime. And doing that, actually, is not easy. It requires a lot of confidence. But I think you can see Reform UK is actually offering a real alternative. And I think people at home can now see that. They can see that we're honest, we're straight talking. They can also see we're ready for the fight. I think there's one other crucial difference with us. They can see that we're different from the other main parties because for one main reason, and Ben, I think, exemplifies this, we put country before party. This... You know, a slogan behind me actually is all that encapsulates that. Let's make Britain great. That is our mantra. That is everything that we believe in. All other parties talk about reform. I hear it bandied around the whole time. But we are reform. It underpins everything we do, and it runs through us like a stick of rock. Let me tell you, we have the policies, we have the people, and we have the vision. We know that the country desperately needs reform. And I'll tell you what, reform is ready. Thank you.